Thank you everyone for logging in. Hello and salam alaikum to everyone. I think we're about ready to get started. I'd like to thank our speakers and our moderator. My job is to give a brief introduction for the speakers and the moderator, and then I would request our moderator, Ms. Hena Zuberi, to take it from there. My name is Dr. Taruj Ali. I'm a pulmonologist here in Richmond, Virginia. And today's audience predominantly is made up of physicians practicing here in the US that are part of this organization called Deccan Alumni Association of North America, which is a group of physicians from a city in India called Hyderabad. Some of you might be familiar with that, but we also have other participants, who are not members of DANA. So we have a diverse crowd listening in. This is also being streamed live on Facebook, and we should have a recording later on for people who miss out. So let me start with brief introductions. First, we have Dr. Maya Mitalipova, and she has an extensive bio in research and stem cell research, and really impressive. I'll try to summarize as best as I can. She was born in Kazakhstan. In 1988, she received a master's degree in genetics from Moscow, and in 1995, her PhD in embryology and genetics from Moscow Medical Genetics Institute. In 1996, she was invited to work at University of Wisconsin-Madison. And there she was trained by Professor First. And while she was training to clone calves, her colleagues in Scotland actually cloned the first sheep. If you guys remember, the sheep was named Dolly. In 2001, she started working for an Australian biotech company, Bresagen, which was based in Georgia. And she was working on human embryonic stem cells. She developed 4 human embryonic stem cell lines. And she also received an NIH grant under President George Bush. And since 2005, she's been at Whitehead Institute for Biomedical Research at MIT in Cambridge, Massachusetts. She works with the world-renowned stem cell research professor, Professor Rudolf Jaenisch. And she has developed stem cell lines that are used in research worldwide. A lot of her research is in Alzheimer's and Parkinson's disease. And a little personal note, in 2007, her mom, who has Parkinson's, she brought her mom here to the US, and she was the sole caregiver for her mom till she passed away in 2017. So thank you so much, Dr. Mitalipova. We're really fortunate to have you here.
Thank you.
Our second speaker is Ms. Aydin Anwar. She is the outreach manager at Save Uyghur campaign. And she has 93 relatives who are missing in East Turkestan, and she is originally from there. I was reading online a little bit about her, and it was mentioned that she's actually the daughter of asylum seekers from China, and she's been an activist for the Uyghur cause. And she has spoken to multiple media outlets. With her most notable piece was on Now This. It's actually available on Facebook. I was watching it earlier, and it had over 100 million views worldwide. Aydin holds a BA from Duke University in International Comparative Studies. Thank you, Aydin Anwar. And finally, we have Ms. Hena Zuberi, who is the director of Justice for All. As you might all know, Justice for All is an organization here in the US that has been instrumental in various causes, including the Burma Task Force, now the Save Uyghur campaign, and also what's going on in India, among many other causes. So welcome to the speakers and the moderator. I would request Ms. Hena Zuberi to take it from here.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you so much to all of you for having us here. I'm going to share a link with you. This is, so just Save Uyghur campaign is a part of Justice for All's campaigns, and I'm going to share a report that we launched earlier this year on why, as a human rights organization who does anti-genocide work, since the Bosnia days, one of our campaigns was Bosnia Task Force. And so we've been doing anti-genocide work for over 25 years. Why we believe that this is a genocide, and this has been our stance for a few years. This is what the activists and advocates who work with us, we believe this is a genocide. And just a few things, a few quick notes on why we believe this is, and then Aydin is inshallah going to go over it much more in detail on the current situation in the region. We base this definition on the UN definition of genocide, and which the Geneva Convention constituted the following acts: killing members of the group, causing bodily or mental harm to members of the group, deliberately inflicting on the group's conditions for life calculated to bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part, imposing measures intended to prevent birth within the group, forcibly transferring children of the group to another group. So these are all definitions of genocide under the Geneva Convention. And from our research, from many testimonies, database collected, there's a database that has collected testimonies of over 7,000 family members from the diaspora who have bore witness to the fact that their relatives are either missing or in detainment camps. The Uyghurs are an Turkic ethnic group that are predominantly practice Islam, and the population of around 20 million. And they're not Chinese. East Turkestan is not China. It is an occupied land, and this is what our organization believes and stands for. So as you read through this report, you'll see, and Aydin will talk about this much more in detail, every part of that definition under the Genocide Convention is happening to the Uyghur population, and bodily harm, mental harm to the group, forced labor, forcibly transferring children of the group to orphanages, and imposing measures intended to prevent birth. This is something that was recently exposed in AP, and unfortunately it took the world that long to catch on to what Uyghur activists and pro-Uyghur activists have been saying for many years. So at this point, I'd like to hand over the presentation to Aydin Anwar, who is leading our Save Uyghur campaign. Aydin?
Assalamualaikum, everyone. Thank you all for joining today's session. Before I get into kind of the details about the current situation beyond what Hena briefly went over, I usually like to start off with like maybe a minute or maybe less than that, a quick run through of history. Obviously the history is so much more detailed than what should be, like, I feel like we should be spending a lot more time on on teaching history, but for the sake of this webinar and for the sake of staying on track, I'm not going to focus too much on it. But the reason I bring up history briefly is also because a lot of people, when they hear about the Uyghur population, they think ethnic minority of China, they think Chinese Muslim, they think just this random population that happens to be in China that happens to be oppressed. And so this narrative, honestly, it's very damaging and kind of hurtful to us as well, as to who we are as a people and our history and who we are as an occupied nation. And one thing I'd like to emphasize is the fact that we are an occupied territory. We are an occupied people with an occupied land. And that's one thing a lot of people don't know, and one thing that we still proactively try to educate the community about. So essentially the people of East Turkestan, which you may commonly have heard it as Xinjiang on the media, which actually means new territory in Mandarin. So the people of East Turkestan had actually lived with centuries of independence until the Manchu-Qing invasion in 1759. Essentially, during that time, there were multiple rebellions and brief periods of this kind of fighting and them trying to achieve liberation. And then in 1911, the Manchu-Qing Empire collapsed with the nationalist China coming to power, and that was the first official Chinese invasion. So 1912, when nationalist China came to power, that was the first official Chinese invasion. And after that, you see multiple rebellions also taking place, and you also see the establishment of the first East Turkestan Islamic Republic in 1933. That was shortly lived after being crushed by Chinese officials and with the assistance of the Soviet Union. And then again in 1930, and again in 1944, you see the establishment of the second East Turkestan Republic, and that was also shortly lived and lasted around 5 years until basically when communist China came to power in 1949. And so since 1949, the people of East Turkestan have been living under basically an ongoing occupation, have been undergoing forms of genocide, ethnic cleansing, all the other horrors that accompany an occupation. And when we talk about genocides happening around the world, I'd like you all to kind of picture almost all of those things happening within East Turkestan, but perhaps in different forms. So when I say different forms, I mean that certain parts of the genocide has been very kind of subtle in the beginning, but people are now catching on to it and finally saying it's a genocide. So one of those things, for example, that you may have heard or had learned before is the use of surveillance, massive surveillance, right? So kind of, again, and this is against jumping really far ahead into the current day, but essentially during the late 20th century, and then the beginning of the 21st century, you have and then also with 9/11 happening, China basically clamps down on the East Turkestani population, basically joining or using the global war on terror to justify its crackdown on the Uyghur and other Turkic people of East Turkestan. So basically what they claim is that these people are, the Chinese government claims that the Uyghur and other Turkic people are people who are prone to radicalism, they're prone to extremism, they're prone to terrorism. And therefore, we have to take measures to prevent that. So what do? We're going to surveil their every action. We're going to monitor, we're going to watch everything that they do. We're going to ask everything that they do. We're going to live inside their homes. And we're going to slowly start to build these camps and prisons to quote unquote, erase the virus from their brains. So what they claim is that the Uyghurs and other Turkic people have this virus in their brain that needs to be cleansed, and this virus is essentially something that could turn into a terrorist attack or or radical thoughts that will danger Chinese society. So that is the Chinese government's justification and claim as to what they're doing. So in 2013, they started building these 2013, Lake documents actually showed that they had planned the construction of these camps, and then we started to see the actual construction of these facilities in 2016, and slowly the rounding up of these people starting from that year onwards. Until this day, we still have people being detained. And the official number 2 years ago, released by major media reports, was 1 million, around 1 million, but we estimate that the number is much greater because, again, people are still disappearing. And I think now estimates are showing that number is at least actually one of the scholars who had basically brought up that number now estimates that number is 1.8 million, but a lot of us activists, we estimate that the number is at least 3 million. Some even say over 5 million or 6 million. So it's the whole situation is really, it's so It's so gruesome to think about because number one, there's just so many unknown factors. But then a lot of the fears that we've been having within us, with when it comes to whether it be estimates, whether it be what's happening specifically on the ground, ends up becoming true later on. So right now, so for those who don't know, these concentration camps again are still existing, and within these camps, China aims to quote unquote re-educate the population. When they also claim that these are vocational training centers where those people are being trained for jobs, which is obviously a bogus claim because majority of these people are people with well-founded careers, or they're retired, or they're simply in high school or college, and they should actually be in school. But either way, what they're doing is they're basically forcibly brainwashing the population, forcing them to renounce their identity, forcing them to renounce their religion, and so on, and also enacting forms of torture and extermination in these camps and prisons as well. And now there's actually been more and more evidence showing that a lot of these people, a lot of people are actually being transferred to prisons where they're now serving massive sentences. So anywhere from 5 to 10 years to 10 to 20 years, even to life imprisonment, depending on their quote unquote crime, which, by the way, now China criminalizes every action. And sometimes there sometimes isn't even a single reason why they're in these prisons. And the Chinese government will actually just make up a reason saying that they, disturb public order, or they have ties with terrorists abroad, or some really ridiculous excuse. So that's kind of the whole quick rundown of the concentration camp story that you may have been hearing. Obviously, there's so much more to go into. Obviously, you can, if you are more interested in learning about it, please go ahead and, there's a lot of resources out there, thankfully, that now have been gathered that you can look up on. But kind of touching back into Hena's point about how this meets the condition of genocide, I'm going to really quickly run through how each condition has been met, because I think this is really important in advocating for our population and understanding how grave of a occurrence this is. Because even for a while, I've been kind of in this working on this cause since late high school, which was like 6 years ago. So in this, and that again was before the camps even happened or started. And we had been calling it genocide then too. So I'll kind of quickly run through exactly now how this meets the 5 conditions. So number 1, the first condition under the UN's definition is killing, right? There has to be evidence of killing, mass killing. And so one of this, and I'm sure you guys have maybe seen the title of this flyer or the title of this webinar, one of them consists of organ harvesting. And oftentimes people will claim, oh, you guys don't have enough evidence. How do you know? Well, we have things like the China Tribunal that have gathered numerous forms of evidence that you can look into. We have testimonies, and not just from Uyghur people, but also Falun Gong people of the Falun Gong population have also, submitted testimony to this, and we have also more and more evidence showing how China is taking these organs at a very fast rate. So when typically people have to wait months or years for an organ or for an organ transplant, this is actually received within a couple of weeks, sometimes within Chinese borders. Beyond organ harvesting, what also constitutes parts of killing is forced abortions and also killing of newborn babies. This is also part of a new report that was released by AP. And this was something, again, that activists and a lot of us people in the population had been talking about. Like Uyghur women would be testifying to how they would get pregnant for a while, for some time. And I think this, basically the Chinese government had enacted a 2-children policy for the Uyghur population. So if a woman were to get pregnant a 3rd time by accident or, unplanned or whatever the reason may be, that oftentimes would end up being forcibly terminated. Even if the baby is 9 months or has been removed from the womb and is perfectly healthy, they would inject the baby, or they would do whatever it takes to actually end the baby's life. And so there are people giving testimony about how they, or nurses and doctors testifying to see how these babies would essentially be thrown when their hearts were still beating. that's one, and again, that's one condition that has been met. I don't really need to go into more detail as to how else killing may be a condition that has been satisfied. There is also testimonies of concentration camp survivors talking about how, they've seen, like, basically one of the camp survivors, Mehirgul Tursun, witnessed 9 women die in her cell alone during her 3 months of detention. People will claim, okay, testimony is not a proper way to, or is not a way to officiate evidence. But unfortunately, with the Chinese government, because everything is so secretive, oftentimes testimony is sometimes one of the few ways we can actually gather information, especially when we're gathering the same kind of testimonies from multiple people. So people are not going to wake up and be like, let me just, make up a lie today and just, try to throw the Chinese government under the bus. So the condition number 2 is deliberately inflicting on the group conditions which bring about physical destructions in whole or in part. So obviously I kind of mentioned some of them to you all, but another thing I wanted to bring into that is the forced DNA tests that have been enacted on the Uyghur population and other Turkic people as well. And then Dr. Maya will probably touch on this as well, because she's going to go into the more organ harvesting and scientific part of it, because I'm not, that's not my field. But anyways, there have been massive testing done on the population forcibly to collect their DNA and all other private health information. And there's also been obviously mass surveillance and criminalizing all acts of worship and day-to-day normal activities. So praying, fasting, saying Assalamu alaikum, having an Uyghur name, having an Islamic name, simply going about your day, or being Uyghur yourself, or being an ethnic Turk, being like a Turk, that itself is a crime. Going abroad, having a relative that is abroad. These are all crimes that China will use to justify you being sent to a camp or a prison. Number 3, the third condition, causing serious bodily or mental harm to the group. Again, there's numerous forms of torture that have been revealed, not just by those giving testimony, but also by people within these camps, or sometimes the researchers that would actually call up a lot of these, even whether it be officials who are working on the campgrounds or police officers, about forms of like kind of tools that are used for beating or for giving quote unquote consequence or giving kind of punishment to the detainees. And they would actually mention some of these tools that would be used to harm these detainees that are in the camps and prisons. There's drugging of prisoners and detainees. Oftentimes they're forced to take pills or drugs that they do not know, or do they not know the effect. And it's not until later where sometimes some of the detainees realize that drug actually had sterilized them, or all of a sudden for a woman, her menstrual cycle has completely stopped. Forced medication. And then there's also more and more evidence showing forced labor, and that is also really good research has been done showing the links between a lot of the companies that we may be purchasing from today and their link to modern day slavery in East Turkestan. So for those who are interested in learning more about forced labor, you can go to ASPI's Uyghurs for Sale report that you can read more into, but essentially those are again, this kind of covers the whole bodily and mental harm to the group. There's actually also testimony talking about detainees also being forced to take drugs, and how a lot of this medication or these drugs would actually cause them to lose their memory, and also not be able to feel things anymore. So they would forget that they have family at home waiting for them, or they basically lose all touch with reality. I would kind of compare that to like Walking Dead, where you become a zombie. You're not dead, but you're also not alive at the same time. So that's how I also interviewed former political prisoners who would tell me a lot of these medication or unknown, I'm saying quote medication, but as a pseudonym, but in reality we don't know what those could be, right? And later on we have even Sister Mehirgul Tursun, who had spent some time in these camps. Now she came to the United States and the doctors told her that she's been sterilized, she can no longer have babies. It was clear that during that time the Chinese authorities basically did sterilize her at that time. Number 4, so the fourth condition is forcibly transferring children of the group. So in this case, while these parents, the parents of these children are in these camps or prisons, you have children who are left alone and often sent to state-run orphanages and boarding schools, where they're essentially taught to hate their own religion, taught to hate their own identity, and are basically being forcibly assimilated into Han Chinese culture. Again, they're being they're being separated from their parents, and which enacts forms of trauma, and they have no idea what's happening at the same time. And a lot of these kids have never spoken Chinese in their entire life, and all of a sudden are being forced into this environment where they're being, again, taught this foreign language and taught to be something that they are not. So essentially, it's kind of like kids are in their own form of concentration camps. They're in their own form of brainwashing centers where they're also subject to forms of abuse and other forms of trauma. Number 5, imposing measures intended to prevent births within the group. Again, I mentioned this before. There is massive evidence of women and men actually being forcibly sterilized in these camps and prisons. And I think there was also even reports talking about people even outside of these facilities being sent to or being told to go to hospitals or to the clinic to get kind of like a health checkup. But in reality, what they do is just enact forms of birth control or IUDs or whatever the method may be to prevent births or to even just sterilize them forever. So these are also, so I've gone through the 5 conditions, and obviously this can just be touching the surface of what we know. But this again is reason why we're emphasizing this is because there hasn't been enough discussion or enough usage of the term genocide. And that's what's kind of annoys me personally, seeing how it's the whole thing is downplayed as like this just persecution or like just what is it, persecution or discrimination. It's not just discrimination. This is literally full-blown wiping out an entire population physically and culturally. So not just a cultural genocide, but also physical as well. And I think we need to really shed light on that. There was reports even showing how the birth rate has actually decreased in the past several years. Now, the birth rate actually decreased by 80%. So think about that number and how detrimental that will be in the coming generation, if there will ever be one, if we don't act swiftly right now. So I'm going to stop here now so we can have Dr. Maya really go more into depth into her field and the organ harvesting topic, because again, that's something that I know a lot of people are really curious about, or they're either they either disbelieve it because it just sounds so unbelievable and so horrific. So I'm giving the floor to Dr. Maya, and if you guys have any questions in the meantime, please go ahead and feel free to write in the chat, and I'll try to answer at the end, inshallah. Thank you.
Thank you, Aydin. Can I continue?
Yes, of course. I just gave the floor.
Yeah, so I'll speak about the DNA sequencing and the link of the DNA sequencing and the organ transplantation. So just to, as Aydin already mentioned, so we know that definitely that entire population of Uyghurs, Kazakhs, other Muslim groups in Uyghur autonomous regions of China, which we call as East Turkestan, they have been forcibly health checked, and the blood samples were withdrawn since about 2016, and it's happening to this date. And specifically, these procedures only been performed only on Turkic people, but not on the Han Chinese population of East Turkestan. So an entire Muslim population blood was used for DNA sequencing, and this we know for sure. So what is a DNA sequencing? And DNA sequencing is a process that determines the sequence of the nucleic acid in the order of nucleic acid in the DNA molecule. It includes any methods that or technology that is used to determine the order of four, as they call it, four bases. It's adenine, guanine, cytosine, and thymine. So this is what actually DNA sequencing is. And what for we usually use DNA sequencing in science and medicine? So usually these procedures are used in science and medicine. So the application include, and they can be used in many aspects of biological research. They can be used in medical research, in forensic studies, and in anthropology. So now we know that Chinese scientists are using Uyghur ethnic DNA for development of artificial intelligent technologies. So it's been reported already in 2019 that sketching someone's face based on solely on a DNA sample sounds like a science fiction, but it isn't. The process called a DNA phenotyping. Scientists use it to analyze gene for their for the traits of their skin color, for the eye color or ancestry, and a handful of companies and scientists are trying to perfect that procedure, and in order to create a facial images that are quite sharp and accurate enough to identify criminals and victims. This was reported in 2019 by New York Times. But currently, these procedures of facial images based on DNA is actually cannot be really much used in DNA fingerprinting or identify the person's identity, his race, and so it's those images are too smooth in order to distinct those features and to determine these people. They can only be used to determine how people look, and such as age or weight, and those things you can. But DNA can be used mostly for gender, to reveal the gender and ancestry, and the technology can be hit or miss when it comes to generating an image or specific face features. So it's not, I think I would say that the science are not there yet to do this kind of. But the question was always remained unanswered. What for a Chinese government is using tens of millions of people DNA sequencing data? It's a very expensive procedure to perform, and DNA sequencing on such a large scale that can cost tens of billions of dollars. So just as an example, to do a DNA sequencing, depending how deep you can do, how big of the DNA sample, like the length of DNA you will be sequencing, that depends on the price. So the least expensive up till today, with all these developed technologies, is about $1,000. So you just can multiply even to 10 million. So they haven't done entire population. They have actually done it for the ages of 12 to 65 years old. So they have withdraw the blood and perform DNA sequencing. So if you just, even if you say that they have done it on 10 million people, so we have a cost already of $10 billion. So this kind of project cannot be carried by any private entity in China or in Xinjiang. So it definitely has to be a state run, a government run project because of the cost of this project. And then if you look at what the cost of DNA sequencing actually consists, that is actually consists of DNA sequencing machines, which the least expensive machine that I actually researched, because Thermo Fisher, who is actually the company right here in Walton where I live, in Boston area, they have sold at least 5 to 10 DNA sequencing machines to Xinjiang specifically. And New York Times in March 2019 had an article on this. So the least expensive DNA sequencing machine depending on the capacity, how many samples the machine can actually run, is cost about $250,000. So that is the least expensive. And the more expensive machines, of course, they would run up to $1 million, millions of dollars per machine. So that's where the cost goes. And then the reagents, and especially the people who will be doing these procedures, and especially the people who would actually analyze DNA sequencing. So we call them bioinformaticians. And bioinformaticians, just to let you know, that this is people who would have a minimal master's degree, but most of those people who can actually do a bioinformatic research, those are holding PhD degrees in biomedical sciences. So they have to really know the subject in order to be able to read those DNA sequencing samples. So that's where the cost actually comes, and that would be around $1,000 per sample, meaning per person. So this has to be really a valid payback outcome to justify billions of dollars project. And it might be, I just have to mention that might be not only for the organ transplantation that China can use this data on DNA sequencing. And this has been done mandatory, forcefully, and never, the results of the DNA sequencing or health check has never been given back to people of East Turkestan. And we know that when they did the health check, they have specifically, because the lots of testimony, especially in China Tribunal, they have done it only the specific organs, the performance of the liver, kidney, perform the checks, and the ultrasound of those organs, just to know for pretty obviously for organ transplantation. So in China, I just on their website by International Transplantation Network Assistance Center, they have posted following price list on their website. And actually, it was what I could find. It was in 2006 for the kidney, $62,000 an average cost. For the liver, $98,000 to $130,000. For liver plus kidney, if the patient needs it, it ranges from $160,000 to $180,000. Kidney and pancreas, $150,000. For the lung, from $150,000 to $200,000. And for the heart, it ranges from $130,000 to $170,000. And for the cornea, for one cornea, it's about $30,000. So as you can see, and right now I know that the transplantation field has been developed pretty well, and now they also use skin for in cosmetic industry. Just to mention that several new methods of DNA sequencing has been developed so far, and the whole procedure of DNA sequencing is actually started in the early 90s, and they were implemented in commercial DNA sequencing by 2000. And we know that here at MIT, we have a Human Genome Institute who actually first sequenced entire human genome. And together all of these DNA sequencing technologies which have been developed, they call it next generation or second generation sequencing methods. And they're highly scalable at the moment. And by scalable, they're allowing entire genome to be sequenced at once. So, and of course, it's for different purposes, and it can be really, really expensive if you do entire genome. So what's the cost of DNA sequencing? It all depends how the bigger site or DNA you want to sequence. If you really know, for example, you want to know if you carry mutations for certain diseases, especially through your ancestry. For example, if my mom had a Parkinson's disease, even as a sporadic Parkinson's disease, now research allows us risk factors, meaning some of the genes that have been mutated in her genome, and do I carry those mutations? And if we know those risk factors, which genes are, so we don't have to actually sequence entire genome of my mom, for example, we will know entire location of that risk factor and the DNA, and I would only sequence that really small region of where might be my mom carried that mutation, in order to see if I inherited. So for that alone, I already would have paid, probably, if I want to know, about $1,000 to know if I carry that mutation, and I am at the risk to actually have a Parkinson's disease. This is just as an example. So those NSG, next generation sequencing technologies, actually has tremendously empowered researchers to look at the insights into health, into anthropologists to investigate the human origins, and also catalyze the personalized medicine movement. So what is the personalized medicine? As I already just mentioned, for example, carrying the mutations through your generation to generation, that could be a personalized medicine. And we actually will know our health in the future, what we, not only for the probably really inherited diseases, but even diseases like heart disease or some other diseases, we might be able to actually know it in advance, and maybe prevent by our lifestyle if we actually sequence and that's what it's called, personalized medicine. But next generation sequencing technologies also had lead to potential benefits to personal medicine, like organ transplantation. This been really tremendously empowered transplantation technologies. The first organ transplantation was conducted in 1953, and the overall process of organ transplantation have been remarkably developed, not only in surgical techniques, but also in pure surgical treatment, like appropriate matching the donor in immunosuppressive agents and things like that. And now organ transplantation considered as a routine curative treatment to end-stage diseases like kidney failure or heart failure or even liver failure. Even so that this successful improvement in transplantation progresses, the acute rejection rate is still significant, and it is up to a 60% within the next 2 years after transplantation. For example, if you got a liver or kidney being transplanted to you, so you will still have a 60% chances within next 2 years after successful transplant to have a rejection rate, 60%, which is really, really high in organ transplantation industry. But here the science come into, and next generation sequencing technologies can be applied to patients suffering from organ failures and failed organ transplantation, and estimating rejection rates using the specific biomarkers that identified by next generation sequencing between the patients and the donors, and finding the best matching donor and transplanting it to the patient and achieve successful donor transplantation. And I tell you, you can actually, even if after successful transplantation in a Western country right now, the donor's organ in the recipient can live up about 10, maybe a little bit over 10 years. It all depends from which organ transplantation you had. So if you have identified by very specific biomarkers in between the patients and the donors, you can actually increase the lifespan of the donor organ up to 30 years. So literally until really end of your life. And this is what actually this DNA sequencing technology actually can bring, the benefit can bring to the organ transplantation industry. The diversity of the human genome is immense as the population of human beings on Earth. And those diversities are ranging from population to personal diversities caused from genomic variation like deletion, insertion, translocations, copy number changes, and things like that. And we call it, and especially we look into when we want to actually find a successful donor to a recipient, we actually look at the single nucleotide polymorphism. So what is a single nucleotide polymorphism? It's actually those nucleotides, 4 nucleotides. It depends through the entire genome. We might have the same genes that actually reads for the same nucleotides, but there will be a one little, like, it's almost like if it is a word, you have one nucleotide, meaning one letter in the word, being actually switched place in when you read that, and that we call it single nucleotide polymorphism, and those we call them SNPs. Those SNPs are actually not sometimes do not cause any mutation. So when you read that DNA and it goes to the, for example, to the protein, and that protein synthesizes, and it can very successfully make an amino acids, which actually consist of the protein, and has no any, but that's how I actually differ from someone else. It could be my sister and my brother and my mom. We would actually carry very similar SNPs. We call it single nucleotide polymorphism. That's why when you actually look for the donor, not only for the organs, but also for the blood donor, for example, if you have a blood cancer and you need bone marrow transplant. So first people we actually searching are our relatives, how much they are matching. And then this is where it's this, because we're similar. And sometimes our relatives, it's a 50-50 match. Sometimes they wouldn't be our perfect match. But where do we look? There is a donor banks for the bone marrow donors. And what do we, sometimes out of million donors, I will have a perfect match who never been blood related for me, but according to those single nucleotide polymorphism, I have the least differences in the SNPs with that particular person, and that person could be my best match for. And this is actually true for blood disorders, especially for blood cancers. But these donor banks do not exist for organs, and those who match us for the blood donors, those could be actually a best match for our organs if we have a failure. But why we can't? Because that person's may never die suddenly when I need that person's heart or liver or kidney. And that's why though we in the West or any other countries except China, we actually cannot kill somebody unless they will get into a car accident or they would die suddenly from but their organs will be perfectly healthy. And this is why we cannot match it in actually other societies except society like China, dictatorship, I would say. And this is what we need for the successful organ transplantation. So we can rely on DNA testing, but not when it is actual. And the timing between somebody actually dies during the accident and wishfully actually become a volunteer for their organ being donated to someone else is too short in order to do a DNA sequencing and matching for with the patients in the line who are actually waiting for those donors. And this is why we cannot actually really match the donors and the recipients in the Western countries or anywhere else. And this is where I just wanted to mention that there is a huge link and direct link between the DNA sequencing and organ transplantation. And we know that the Chinese government favor forced organ harvesting from prisoners of conscience. And this has been practiced for a substantial period of time, involving a very large number of victims. It is beyond doubt that the evidence presently received that the forced organ harvesting of organs has been happened on a largest scale by state-supported or approved organizations and individuals. And the state-approved DNA sequencing of entire Muslim population of East Turkestan, namely Xinjiang, without informed consent is another proof of evidence that the knowledge obtained from this genomic data analysis can be used, and most likely has been used, to determine if the patient and the potential donor are the better match for the long-term success of transplantation. And we know that they have been very well advertised in their website, and even we have heard terms as a halal organ transplantation from very rich Saudi Arabian recipients. And this is, we have seen the videos where they advertised in the 5-star hotels, where they advertised the rooms where they can pray and so on. But of course, they haven't said this is actually the hospitals or the hotels next to the hospitals where those organs. So organ transplantation in China listed as about 10,000 a year. But we know that there are more than 800 hospitals in China alone that have performed organ transplantation. And we know this about the statistic of organs that been transplanted in China in 2019, 2018, over hundreds of thousands a year. And the waiting period for those organs in China can be just a week or 2 weeks. And you know why? Because there is on the computers, there are millions of people's DNA that is waiting just on the software. And if you, for example, in any Western country want to have an organ in China, so you can actually give your sample of DNA, send it to China, it will be sequenced within, let's say, a couple of days. And then your sequencing data can be blasted in for millions of other Uyghurs and Kazakhs and other Turkic people of East Turkestan, and it will take just a minute when the whole this process, and then you will find that matching donor. And if the donor is not in those concentration camps or prisons, so there will be enough reasons when they can actually just knock your door in the night, and that particular person can just disappear in those camps and prisons. And with that, I just want to mention about the China Tribunal that happened in 2018 and 19 in London, and there was over 50 witnesses, including Falun Gong practitioners and former camp survivors, and also several surgeons, including surgeon Dr. Anwar Tohti, Dr. Anwar yes, Anwar Tohti in London, who is now a taxi driver, but in 1990s he had performed forcefully, as been ordered to perform organ harvesting in war, several young men in East Turkestan. With that, I want to thank you, and sorry if I took too long. Thank you. Your microphone.
Thank you so much, Dr. Maya, for your time and that presentation. I want to open up the floor for questions now. If any of our attendees have questions, please put them in the Q&A box. One question that I see in the chat box is that Dr. Or Sayed Zafar is asking, this is a grave medical emergency of mammoth proportions. Have there been any statements from the National Human Genome Research Institute at NIH or the American Organ Transplant Association?
As far as I know, no, it hasn't. So I would like to bring awareness. We actually wrote an op-ed. It was a review article together with scientists and medical doctors in Canada. And we submitted early this year into Lancet in New England Journal of Medicine. And I believe that it still hasn't been published, and these journals hasn't published. And I know for sure that one of these two journals has rejected our article, and we really covered extensively the issue of forced organ harvesting.
And that is something, I think there's just not enough education. Also, the fact that China's hold on information that comes out, it's not like other countries where you can send in a group of investigators. Human Rights Watch is not allowed to go into that area. The United Nations hasn't been allowed to go into that area. So it's very difficult to get verified information in the way that you can do in other parts of the country, world. But this is one of the things that our intention is to educate doctors in, physicians associations in the United States, perhaps get a bill passed on, you can't stop someone from traveling overseas to get a transplant, but perhaps a bill that doesn't let insurance companies cover the costs once they have gotten the transplant and come back. So that is something that we're exploring and thinking about as we move forward. But one of the first things is to educate people, and and that is where, especially those of you who are physicians, can get involved and help in spreading the word, spreading the reports, helping us set up more of these in different places. We're willing to come, whether it's your hospital, whether it's your group of surgeons, whatever, just like Dr. Taruj did this over here. So I think education is number one. Someone is asking, I'm a scientist and a bioinformation and conduct bioinformation at Harvard. My question to Dr. Maya is, what can we do to bring this to the limelight in our scientific community to induce a public response?
That would be great. So I think we as a scientist or medical professionals, we really have a duty to educate the public, and especially our medical field, medical researchers, medical doctors, scientists, about this issue that is happening in China. And this is not something new. It's been going on for over 20 years right now, nearly 30 years. We definitely have to educate the public, and especially medical field, medical doctors, that this is happening. And one way, as Hena just mentioned, there are just about before yesterday, on October 3 days ago, South Korea has joined the list of, I believe it's a list of 9 countries who actually banned their citizens to go to China for the organs. They can, as Hena said, they cannot ban. They can go for their own. They can actually get their own money and go for transplantation. But what it happens when you come back to your country of your origin, so the medical insurance will not be provided to these people for post transplantation care, and especially for medications like immunosuppressant drugs. So those kind of things that won't be covered by the insurance. And this is a list of 9 countries. And if I'm not mistaken, the countries who actually ban like this is Spain, Italy, Taiwan, Israel, now South Korea, and last year in June 2019 it was a Belgium, and then Lithuania. So this is the list that I remember out of my head. What I've been working for the past year or year and a half probably. So we're trying, we kind of like united with Canadian medical researchers, scientists, and professors of medical school, Australian, then UK, and us in United States. Now we have Justice for All who joined, which is I'm so grateful. So what we want to do, we created letters, and I'll share the letters with you. I have shared it on social media account. Letters written for the citizens of United States, as well as a separate letter written for the doctors. Just bringing up this issue and asking for their signatures. So what we can do with this from Medical Association of United States, from doctors and also from the citizens, we can actually go to our congressmen and the senators, which I already started speaking to Senator Markey and Congressman Jim McGovern about this, and just bring these evidences to their attention, to have a resolution in United States Congress to ban at least Americans or Canadians. And we are working on this, and especially if the scientists like you, Nafis, and other researchers, if we join, that would be, joint up effort is always better.
Exactly. Thank you, Dr. Maya. We have some young students on the call as well, which is really, really heartwarming to get young activists and students on the line. So one of the things she's asking, Angeline is asking, how would you start to create change about the Oregon black market? And so that was something that perhaps Dr. Taruj, if you'd like to answer that, or Dr. Maya, if that's something that how can, from within the medical community, how can you start that change? Is there a process or infrastructure for doctors in the US to report individuals who have partaken in transplant tourism?
I think, you know, at the start of all this is awareness, right? People need to know that this is actually happening, especially people in the medical field. You know, I've learned so much from this talk today. I mean, I knew this was a problem, but the extent of it, you know, the nature of it. So it's a lot about awareness. And like Dr. Maya said, if a lot of physicians, scientists get more awareness and they get together and they speak at, you know, their organizations within their community and spread awareness, and then eventually, you know, maybe have a bill or something that kind of discourages this or has some punitive action, whether it's in the form of, you know, the insurance companies not paying for this, or, you know, having a process by which we can stop this. I mean, if you think about it, it is kind of like human trafficking, right? I mean, it's a similar kind of concept. So I think it starts with awareness and then just spreading the word in various organizations and everybody, taking ownership of this and taking this forward.
As we tried, and I know that ETAG, it's an transplant abuse, a non-profit organization based in Australia, but it's an international organization. They tried actually to speak to organizers of organ transplantation society, where every year they have from all over the countries transplant doctors come together and report on their new findings and what is actually. So there is a society, and they are actually heavily led by Chinese transplant doctors, and China by itself are paying a huge amount of money to this international organ transplantation society. And it was absolutely impossible for ETAC actually to ban Chinese doctors to come to these meetings and share information on the organ transplantation. And this was something that ETAC was working on it for quite a few years, as far as I heard.
And this is not going to stop. This is something that I just wanted to share with all of you, that if we don't stop China, this will spread to India. India is making detention camps right now. With the process of CAA and NPR, you have people who are going to be stateless and homed in these detention camps, very similar to the concentration camps that have been set up in China, that China has set up in East Turkestan. And along with that, the United States has pulled out of the WHO. That leaves a gap, and where Chinese doctors and influencers will be lined up. It's the same thing that we just had a recent discussion with folks at the UN who've worked there for several years. And one of the things that they shared with the China Coalition, which is a group of human rights organizations working on China, and Justice for All is part of it. And one of the things he shared is that in the UN, you have sponsored young people every year who work in the system. They're sort of like fellows or interns. And for years, the United States and other governments have not been able to, or are not sponsoring enough of these young people. So what happens, but China pays for at least every year 40 to 50 young people to be sponsored. They pay for their stay, they pay for their salaries, and then they get in that UN system. So now they're posted into different places in different UN agencies once they have graduated from that program. And the US is heading the other way, where we're pulling out. And just tomorrow, a major thing is happening, that the nominations for China to be a part of the UN councils. So this is something that we, because of our country in the past, especially in the past 4 years of pulling away from these major international organizations, it's left a void and a gap of leadership that is being filled by fascists and the CCP. So this is something just to keep in mind. There's one more question before we wrap it up. I know Aydin has another. So if there are any questions for Aydin, please go ahead and post them in the chat or in the Q&A. There's Brother Zahir Adil has a question excellent, though short explanation. Thank you, Sister Maya. Good to see you on this webinar. I remember Thermo Fisher had said that it stopped selling to East Turkestan region. Are companies even able to monitor where their machines are being used in China, or would that just be a smokescreen?
So yes, as I mentioned, no one buys every year couple of $1 million machines. Once they bought that machine, it's already there, and they're using it of course. But what the Thermo Fisher actually announced last year under the pressure because of the New York Times article, and I think there was a congressional probably pressure to Thermo Fisher, what they actually promised that they will stop giving any technical service to run these machines in East Turkestan. And I would tell that maybe China doesn't need technical services because those DNA sequencing machines are in China and probably in pretty much in every city, and they have great scientists and great technical personnel being trained, especially by us in United States and elsewhere, that they can do pretty well without technical service. So once you sold those machines, they are there. That's what they promised.
Thank you so much, Dr. Maya. So if there are any other questions, please do put that in the chat. We hope to finish this webinar.
I have one question for Aydin. Somebody just messaged me, and the question was that how does one actually end up in these concentration camps? Are they just picking people off the street? How does that happen?
Yeah, so that's a good question. I would first start off by saying that, well, I mentioned briefly about mass surveillance, but I guess I'll go briefly into that as to how that goes from surveillance to the camp. So obviously, China has employed massive forms of, or certain forms of technology to monitor each person's movements and actions, and also ways, and also like kind of what they say. So an example is they actually have put Chinese government officials to live inside Uyghur homes to basically monitor their everyday activity, to see if they're engaging in religion, to assess their political views. And so if you meet those conditions that they're looking for, then they send you to these camps or prisons. But what China will actually, they won't say that these are government officials that are going to be monitoring you. They actually claim that this is a program to promote ethnic unity between Han Chinese people and Uyghur families, because they're saying, oh, there's increasing ethnic tension between you all. Let's have you guys all basically move in together. Essentially, you're having essentially a colonizer go into your home and just forced to live with you, and then essentially it's like a surveillance within your own, what's supposed to be a sacred and private space. So that's one way, right? That's within your private home. When you step out, there's, facial recognition technology, there's voice recognition technology. You just have to pass through multiple checkpoints in order to run a basic errand, like going to the grocery store or picking up their daughter from school. Whatever that case is, there is always measures to be surveilling these people. And so oftentimes, I mean, that's one way of surveillance. So if they find something that looks iffy, like for example, they pull up their phone, I say so oftentimes when they check them, they check their phone, right? If somebody sent a message to them saying Assalamu alaikum, or if you had a picture on your phone that has a little graphic that says like Ramadan Mubarak or Eid Mubarak or some kind of Quranic verse. We sometimes send our our families like certain graphics on WhatsApp whenever we want to share something, or let's say you're having a conversation with a friend, you're talking about something faith related or something that China deems as suspicious, they will criminalize that, saying that you are engaging in an act of terrorism or engaging in an act of extremism, or if you contact someone abroad. So if they see that their messages, they've contacted their family abroad, or if contacting someone abroad, they're saying that you're connected with potential terrorists outside of China. Therefore, you are prone to radicalism and prone to extremism. So we need to cleanse this virus from your brain that is developing. So they will find excuses, right? And there's actually a whole list of potential reasons that someone could be sent to a camp that you can find on the Human Rights Watch website. There's, I think, a list of over 70 reasons that have been gathered through testimonies and people talking about why they were sent in the first place. Some of them even include something like growing a long beard, refusing to shave off your beard, having a tent, like having a gathering of more than 5 people in your home. So and again, these are all easily detected by the Chinese government because everything is monitored within your home when you step outside, and even your telephone. So right now I can't even contact my family back home because in East Turkestan, because it is being monitored by the Chinese government, and I could put their lives in danger by doing so. And I know there are even some Uyghurs listening to this or watching this who haven't spoken to their parents back home in multiple years now. They haven't heard their voice, and they do not know if they're alive or dead. It's because China is a master at monitoring and surveillance, and will criminalize every act as a result of that. So that is how people are being rounded up, and oftentimes they're either rounded up by random police people or police men who arriving at the house door, barging in and just taking them away. Sometimes let's say your son or somebody of your family goes out to run an errand, sometimes they would never come home. There would be no notice whatsoever about where they've gone and what they're up to. So the Chinese government doesn't give any formal notice. Sometimes they'll actually be sent to a camp and then all of a sudden be sentenced to a certain number of years in prison. And then once that happens, then sometimes the family is then informed, and by then it's too late, and there is no legal trial or any kind of way to fight for their release. What's done is done, and people just wait at that point. And you also can't often visit these people in the camps or prisons either. So oftentimes you're in this kind of state of you're in this extended state of unknown, not knowing where your loved one is and what their state is, if they're even alive or dead. So that is a kind of reality that a lot of us are facing now, even as Uyghurs abroad. We're living with a lot of anxiety, depression, panic attacks, sleepless nights, nightmares, and other mental health issues that are affecting our ability to go about our daily lives because of just how horrific this tragedy is. And Allah knows how much more how much harder it is to be there. Alhamdulillah, I live in a free society, but a lot of us, my family back home, we don't know the hell that they're living through right now. So that's a quick I guess the fastest way I could respond to that question. So
Thank you.
One question that I want to answer from Matthew is there a process or infrastructure for doctors in the United States to report individuals who have partaken in transplant tourism? So particularly in the United States compared to any other countries, the numbers the people who actually went for the organ transplants they don't have a centralized place where it's been reported or registered, or there is not even such a statistic exists in the United States. I already looked into this, and this is probably just because of the insurance system in the United States and so on and so on. But if we will have a bill in place, which we really want to push for it in Congress and Senate, then that bill particularly will be there will be some infrastructure where the doctors have to report their patients, where they probably fill up the forms, where they have the organ transplantation has happened, in which country, and so on. So then they will know the numbers and statistics in the United States. This is actually really specific for United States, not even for other countries, like even Canada. They have an infrastructure in other countries where they actually can get these numbers. But we in the United States do not. So we really have to have something that we can register these patients. Thank you for your question.
Well, thank you so much to both of you, and for Dana for arranging this. I have put in your chat box a link to, currently there is a bill in Congress on Uyghur forced labor prevention. This bill has passed the House almost unanimously. Only 3 people either abstained or voted no. But we are facing an uphill battle in Senate because there's a lot of pushback from retail association on this. Forced labor is illegal in the United States. Any goods made coming in from forced labor is illegal. So what this bill does is specifically puts the onus on companies, because one of the things that we found in our work was it's very hard to boycott, like do a blanket boycott of China, because even this laptop that I'm using to have this webinar has components made in China. So when majority of the people that we have been working grassroots would say back to us that it's very, very hard to boycott China. So this bill makes it easy for you to not have goods made with forced labor in your homes. This puts the onus on the companies to prove to the US government, that to the Border Patrol, that the goods that are coming in are not being made by forced labor, or their supply chains are clean and they're not coming in from East Turkestan. Right now, East Turkestan is the only region in the world where workers' rights groups have said that there is no way that any company can be audited. Auditors have pulled out of that region as of last month. This is the only country in the world where they are not saying this is fixable. They're saying get out of there completely. So this is part of the End Uyghur Forced Labor Coalition. You can look that up and find out more about it. But please, Virginia senators have not signed the bill yet. If you're in other parts of the state, it really, really helps. We're doing calls and meetings with senators every week. Every day we have meetings, alhamdulillah, and it really helps to hear from constituents and to hear from people who are concerned about this cause. So I would really urge you all to make those calls or send those emails. Thank you so much. I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Taruj.
Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you, Dr. Maya. Thank you, Aydin, Hena. Like I said, this was really good information for me as a physician, and I'm sure for our audience. And as we said, hopefully this will create awareness, and each of us as physicians, as scientists, as professionals can hopefully take this message and try to spread this message. This webinar is being recorded, and I'll share a recording with Sister Hena so she can put it on Justice for All website. We will also have it on our website, Deccan Alumni Association of North America, and we will share it extensively within other groups. And I hope we have more of these sessions so that we can spread the awareness and ultimately, hopefully have some bills that can bring about some lasting change. And thank you once again for taking time. And everyone have a good night.
Thank you so much for having us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.